Ah. Welcome, Doctor.
What's going on? Don't you realize how dangerous it is to intercept a transmat beam?
Oh, come, Doctor. Not with our techniques. We Time Lords transcended such simple mechanical devices when the universe was less than half its present size.
Look, whatever I've done for you in the past, I've more than made up for. I will not tolerate this continual interference in my life.
Continual? We pride ourselves we seldom interfere in the affairs of others.
Except mine.
You, Doctor, are a special case. You enjoy the freedom we allow you. In return, occasionally, not continually, we ask you to do something for us.
I won't do it. Whatever it is, I refuse.
Daleks.
Daleks. Tell me more.
We foresee a time when they will have destroyed all other life forms and become the dominant creature in the universe.
That's possible. Tell on.
We'd like you to return to Skaro at a point in time before the Daleks evolved.
Do you mean avert their creation?
Or affect their genetic development so that they evolve into less aggressive creatures.
That's feasible.
Alternatively, if you learn enough about their very beginnings, you might discover some inherent weakness.
All right. Just one more time.
You'll do it.
Yes. If you'll let me have the space-time coordinates, I'll set the TARDIS for Skaro.
There's no need for that, Doctor. You're here. This is Skaro.
What?
We thought it would save time if we assumed your agreement.
What's this?
A time ring. It will return you to the TARDIS when you've finished here. There's just one thing.
What's that?
Be careful not to lose it. That time ring is your lifeline. Good luck, Doctor.
Just a moment. Don't just disappear! What about Sarah and Harry?
Hello and welcome to Who Watches Who, a Doctor Who podcast with me, Matthew, and as always, I am joined with...
Hello, it's Scott.
Hello, Scott, and it is the beginning-ish of April, which means we can continue our dive chronologically through Doctor Who, which is kind of what we're doing for this year, and we are finally on to Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor, with probably one of his most highly regarded episodes, if not one of the most highly regarded episodes of all time. And this is only the second time we've actually covered Tom Baker.
Yeah, so the only other time we've covered Tom Baker was with The Hand of Fear, and it's an episode we both loved so much.
Yeah, I adored it. I thought it was really compelling, seeing the inside of a nuclear facility in such detail. Really unmatched when it comes to any other show or documentary for that matter. But this episode, The Genesis of the Daleks, first aired on the 8th of March 1975, which was a Saturday and an upsetting 48 years and 28 days ago to the day. I don't know why that's upsetting. The US President was Gerald Ford and the UK Prime Minister was one Harold Wilson, who was Prime Minister for a very long time. Twice, we so discovered.
Did we?
Yeah, last night when we tried. Yeah, last night when we tried to record this the first time. Don't worry about that. But Harold Wilson, he was Prime Minister twice, which is interesting. Scott, could you guess as to what is the number one movie at the box office this week in cinemas in mainly the United States, 1975?
Well, I remember this weekend really well. It was The Towering Inferno.
Yeah, did you see it in cinemas by chance?
Yeah,
were you
opening
number
weekend.
one at the queue? Yeah, of course. The Towering Inferno is, of course, a 1974 American disaster film directed by John Gillerman and produced by Irwin Allen, featuring an ensemble cast led by Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen, notable for being in every movie from the 1970s. He was an extremely large movie star. It was adapted by Sterling Silliphant's... It was adapted by Sterling Silliphant from the novels The Tower by Richard Martin Stern and The Glass Inferno by Thomas N. Scorcha and Frank M. Robinson. So this is a movie that is two books combined into one movie, which is not something I've ever heard about before or seen ever replicated again. Two different books adapted into the same movie. These books must be exceedingly similar.
Yeah, I can't think of any movie that has two books from two different writers, but I can't think of like a series of unfortunate events which kind of combines three books into one. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, but, those were all three books of the same series, whereas this, as far as I can tell, is two separate books. In addition to McQueen and Newman, the cast includes such people as William Holden, Faye Dunaway, Fred Astaire, Susan Blakely, Richard Chamberlain, O.J. Simpson, Robert Vaughn, Robert Wagner, Susan Flannery, Gregory Sierra, Dabney Coleman, and Jennifer Jones in her final role. 10 points if you can catch the name that stood out to me in that list. The Towering Inferno was released theatrically on December 16th, 1974, and the film received generally positive reviews from the critics and earned around $203.3 million, which is a staggering amount of money in the 1970s, and it gave it the highest grossing film of 1974, and it got nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and won 3 Academy Awards for Best Song, Best Cinematography, and Best Editing. So maybe a movie to check out at some point. I don't know if I'm ever going to watch it, but it seems like it would be a fun old time.
I mean, it is 50 years old, so I imagine it wouldn't hold up for us.
I don't know. Some 1970s cinema is still very, very good.
Yeah, but depends on the movie.
It does depend on the movie, but how can a movie with O.J. Simpson be anything but amazing?
He never did anything wrong, did he?
No, exactly. He wrote a whole book about it. In 1817, the New York Stock Exchange on this day is founded, which everybody thought was super cool and has led to nothing but great stuff for everybody. Then, in 1910, Baroness Raymond de Laroche of Paris becomes the first ever licensed female pilot, which is super cool. Then, in 1996, directly inspired by these events, Fargo, directed and written by Joel and Ethan Coen, starring Frances McDormand, William H. Macy, and Steve Buscemi, is released in the US. I absolutely love that movie. Absolutely love Fargo. Adore it.
It's been a long time. I need to go back into the Fargo movie and also the TV show. I've only seen one season of the TV show, but I hear nothing but great things about the other seasons I missed out on.
Yeah, same. I was watching the TV show very recently, and I've kind of dropped off at the minute just because there's so many other shows and so many other things to do and so many games to play and so many movies to watch and so much Doctor Who I have to watch for this goddamn podcast. I just can't seem to fit it in anywhere. But yeah, it's definitely a show I want to get around to at some point because I do love the movie quite a lot. And then in 2022, Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon formally apologises to the 4,000 Scots, mostly of whom were women, that were accused of witchcraft between 1563 and 1736, which is something that I'm sure they're all really happy about and something they were all asking for. So I'm glad that that's happened and we can finally put this issue to bed. We've solved the misogyny of the past, and everything's good. We can just move on.
Yep. No more misogyny. The Me Too era happened, and everything's fine now.
Yep. There's no problems in the world. We fixed everything. And that's everything that happened on this day, the 8th of March. But there was something very particular that happened on the 8th of March, 1975, and that was the release of Genesis of the Daleks. So, Scott, why don't you take us into how this came about? How did this episode end up getting released? I just don't know.
Yeah, of course. We're only covering this episode because basically Genesis was like the #1 most popular story, voted in Doctor Who magazine 1998. In 2009, it was third place behind Blink at #1, which we've already covered if you want to listen to that podcast, and Caves of Androsani at #2, which we're covering next month. So no guess as to why I chose that episode for next month.
No, because you like the title.
It placed third place again in 2014, and The Guardian actually placed the story in their top 10 in 2014 as well. And yeah, is this an episode you've watched before?
No, this is not an episode I had ever seen before. It's an episode I knew about and a story that I knew about going into it, simply because, I'm a Doctor Who fan that's been on the internet, and so I've seen other people talk about it, I've seen everybody rave about it, and talk about how good it is, and it comes up in discussion all the time, especially when that Capaldi episode aired with Kid Davros, which I really like, and you hate because you're a grumpy loser man.
We need to get into that episode at some point, because It could go on as a debate, I think. I don't so much about the episode.
I'll just convince you that it's great again, like I did with the Doctor Who movie. But yeah, it's not an episode I've seen before doing this podcast, but it's one I knew about and one that has got extremely high expectations to live up to. So I'm curious. I've only seen the first 2 episodes so far for the podcast, but I'm curious as to if it's going to live up to that throughout this month. I have a suspicion it might not, but again, maybe it will.
Yeah, interesting. I'm guess we'll find out why you have that suspicion.
Because I hate old things.
I first watched this episode when I bought the Davros DVD box set. It has every Davros episode and also the Davros audio dramas from Big Finish. I think there's like 8 full cast audio dramas on this DVD set, which is amazing for your money. Like, it's the first DVD I ever bought for my own money as a child in 2008. And yeah, I just fell in love with this episode. I think it's the first classic Who I owned on DVD as well. So great box set. Differing quality between all the Davros episodes, but Genesis of the Daleks is a bop.
Well, we'll see about that. We'll see if it is. It is 6 episodes. So I don't know if there's ever a case in classic Who where I think 6 episodes is required. But we'll see.
I'll just say it off the bat. I think Genesis of the Daleks is one of the better 6-parters. There's obviously filler, but you don't feel the filler as much as Enemy of the World, where one episode is just in the kitchen the entire episode.
Yeah.
So obviously the writer of Genesis of the Daleks was Terry Nation. He started up as a stand-up comic in 1955. Around this time, comedians were becoming more popular due to the radio becoming more popular. Lots of new comics were popping up around this time, which he wanted to get a part of. He said he thought it was really good and used to get laughs because the pubs he performed in, he admits they probably only found him funny because they were they were drunk.
Yeah, but to be fair, like, a drunk audience is like what you want as a comedian, isn't it? You know, it's like the 2-drink minimum. Like, that's the classic joke when it comes to doing stand-up.
If you want to get on national radio as a comedian, I don't think, national radio. Most of the people are listening to them in the cars. You don't want to work your material through drunk audiences.
No, but I mean, it depends on how desperate you are to get on the radio. You could probably make a semi-okay living just going pub to pub. But yeah, depends how high you want to aim.
So he went on to many auditions around London to kickstart his career until one day somebody basically told him, "The jokes are really good, it's just you who's not funny." And this snapped him out from wanting to do stand-up, which is brutal feedback, but I guess it helped him further his career into sci-fi.
Yeah, and it is brutal, but it's feedback that I think is, it's got like a grain of truth to it, because you can write the funniest joke in the world, but if you deliver it wrong, it's not funny. It's all about how you present the joke and your personality behind it. Like, I think the person saying that, your jokes are funny is being like, you are a great writer. You do writing really well. You are not a good performer because you're not performing these jokes correctly,
A good example of really funny people who write great jokes and perform it really badly are Mess. That YouTube channel. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but they perform their jokes really badly.
I didn't realize they were jokes. I thought it was very serious. You've been laughing at it? I wasn't. They're not supposed to be laughed at.
Oh yeah, that very serious moment where Sean eats poop.
Yeah. It's really a upsetting character study of a man who's lost everything and the mental breakdown and trauma that he goes through that leads him to scat,
I presume none of the audience knows what we're talking about. We're talking about Mathew's YouTube channel Mess, which is actually really quite good.
Yeah, it's fantastic. youtube.com/mess YouTube, I think, is where you find it. Go into our YouTube channel. It's in the channels page. It's great. It's dumb. It's very dumb. I recommend watching it.
So eventually someone introduced Terry Nation to Spike Milligan, who was a huge comic in the late 50s. And Terry Nation was immediately handed a check for £5 to write for Spike, which is a lot of money in those days. I'm not sure how much money it would account to now, but that's impressive.
I can find out. What was it, £5?
But yeah, in 1958, let's say.
Five whole pounds.
Yep.
5 whole pounds. £5 in 1958 is worth £149.46 today.
Not bad for your first gig, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, like, it would go further than it would today as well, you know.
Yeah. So Terry Nation wound up finding a lot of consistent work around this time, but he said the idea of doing 30 minutes of comedy work for 13 weeks was like torture to him. So he decided to focus on drama instead. I imagine it would be torture to just come up with new material every fucking week to fill half-hour slots.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Hang on, I've accidentally put the number 100 onto my screen. Oops, how do I?
What does that mean?
On OBS, I've written the number 100, and it's on my face right now. Ooh. Come on. Yes.
How did you manage that?
I don't know. Yes, there we go. Got rid of it. Right.
Nice. So because he was associated with comedy for so long, he found it hard to be accepted for a drama until Thames Television, which was ITV, approached him in 1962 to adapt a Philip K. Dick story for one of her sci-fi anthology shows, and this became his first step into sci-fi. In 1963, this year should sound familiar to you. In 1963, he began to write for Tony Hancock, a huge comedian who had a Thursday night show. Later that year, he was contacted by his agent about a children's TV show called Doctor Who. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
Doctor what?
Inspector Spacetime, I suppose. Terry Nation was insulted by this because he didn't do things like that. He just thought children's TV shows were like low. The lowest his career could ever go was to write for children's TV, and he never wrote for Doctor Who.
Yeah. Okay.
So he continued working for Tony Hancock, and the two men got into a huge fight. Basically because he was trying to push new material onto Tony Hancock, and Tony Hancock was like, "No, I'll just do my old bits." So Terry Nation soon found himself out of a job, and with his tail between his legs, he returned to his agent and asked him to please say yes to the BBC. So this is how he got to Doctor Who, just after a huge fight with this comedian dude. His first story was The Daleks, which of course became a massive success for both his show and for Terry Nation. And eventually Walter Tuckwell, an entrepreneur in the toy business, was able to contact Terry Nation and helped him get 50% ownership of the Daleks, meaning that by Christmas 1964, Daleks merchandise was the number one toy for little kids. And it's also why the Peter Cushing movies existed, you know. They were able to get the license to use the Daleks, which we covered last year, and we're covering the second one next month. I'm looking forward to that.
Dalek Mania, as it was known.
Yeah, just the idea of getting 50% ownership of the Daleks is
so
kind
much
of
money.
impressive.
Yeah, Jesus.
However, sadly, Raymond Cusick, the designer of Daleks, didn't see a single penny from the merchandise, which Terry Nation kind of waves off by saying he was a salaried employee. I think he knew the nature of his work, which is depressing.
Yeah, that's pretty lame.
You know, like 90% of what makes a Dalek is the design.
Oh yeah, it's like the one thing. You see what the Dalek looks like, and you go, yes, that's the Dalek. That's the famous design of a Dalek, you know.
Yeah, and you never look at a toilet plunger the same way ever again, do you?
Exactly.
His second story for season 1 was The Keys of Marinus, a story known for having a different location every single week, which was a huge challenge for a show to try to keep changing locations. You've seen this story, and it's a decent story.
Mm-hmm. As far as Classic Who can go. Haha, burn
Got
on
him.
Classic Who.
His third story was The Dalek Invasion of Earth, which we're doing the movie adaptation next month. And this saw the Daleks roaming around London really effectively, and an iconic shot of just the Daleks basically doing the Nazi salutes, which is very prominent in Genesis of the Daleks, the whole salute thing.
I don't know what you're talking about. That's just they're set on. It's an alien planet. What is a metaphor? I don't understand.
Dalek Invasion of Earth was followed by The Chase, an insane Dalek story that changes locations each week, like The Keys of Marinus. It's also a borderline parody of the Daleks. Basically, Frankenstein's monster and Dracula appear as robots at some point, and Frankenstein's monster picks up one of the Daleks and just throws it like a wrestler.
Right. Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that if you get.
We need to cover The Chase. It is weird as fuck.
It's so big though. It's so many parts.
It's like 6 parts.
Mm-hmm.
He then wrote Mission to the Unknown, which was a prequel episode to his 12-part epic, which he wrote with Dennis Spooner, The Daleks Master Plan. But the two men only had a few times to get broad directions because. The two men only met a few times to get broad directions for the story because Terry Nation was busy on his next show, The Baron. The Baron only lasted for one season of 30 episodes, which he wrote 17 of, which is
Jesus Christ.
writing 17 episodes in a year. He was also the creator.
That is a lot.
Yeah, he was also the creator of the show, and he wrote 14 episodes of The Saint as well in the 60s, 6 episodes of The Avengers, and a handful of episodes of a few other shows. Busy time for Terry Nation in the late 60s.
Busy indeed.
As early as 1965, Terry Nation attempted to sell the Daleks as a spin-off to America. He had connections because the Saint and the Baron both did well in that country. He wrote the pilot script and named it The Destroyers with a budget of £42,000, which was over 10 times the amount of a standard Doctor Who episode at the time. And I would love to fucking see this because it was shot on film and produced in... It would have been shot on film and produced in colour, which I think would have been incredible.
That would have been really cool. What year did he try to do this in?
In the mid-60s.
Let's say 1965. How much was it?
42,000.
I'm just curious about inflation now. Oh, he wanted a budget of £1,040,471.99.
Yeah, which is still kind of low budget, but it's much more budget than Doctor Who ever got. But I would have loved to just see that come into fruition. I think he did sell the Daleks to another TV show. It's lost media now, but it's basically about a man having nightmares and a Dalek a Dalek rolls into his room, and it's lost media, but that exists.
I think the best ever adaptation of the Daleks in a medium that isn't Doctor Who is the Lego Batman movie. So
they were also in Looney Tunes Back in Action, which was probably the first time I ever saw a Dalek. They basically go to like a sci-fi base, and there's lots of sci-fi aliens, and just one of them is a Dalek.
I'm sure they've also been in The Simpsons at some point.
Probably. Actually, they definitely have been.
Yeah.
David Whittaker would then become the main writer of the Dalek episodes in the Troughton era, which we discussed on Enemy of the World because he wrote that episode as well. Terry Nation did not like his handling of the Daleks because he thought Dennis was turning them into simple robots, and Terry thought they were way more complex than that. I think he has a fair argument. The Daleks definitely feel like less Dalek-y than usual, and I feel like it's a problem with the modern era. They introduce the Daleks every year, and sometimes they just appear off as robots. It's really weird.
I I think it's just a problem with the Daleks as a concept, though, because like the entire idea of the Daleks is they want to be these robots. You know, they don't want to be what they perceive as a weaker being, which is like, you know, the Khaleds or whatever, you know, the human version of themselves. They've mutated themselves into these killing machines. They want to be machine. They want to be Dalek. They want to be superior. So surely if you want to show a Dalek being the best Dalek it can be, you want that thing to be robotic and have no emotions. Like it's a hard middle ground to try and play with.
Yeah, and Terry Nation basically came up with the idea of Davros because he thought when the Daleks have to make long speeches and they just immediately become boring because obviously they are really one note.
He watched the Peter Cushing movie.
Arc.
He watched the Peter Cushing movie and went, "Oh my god, this is going on forever."
Yeah, with Davros he wanted a thing that was half man and half Dalek to basically speak for them, and Davros just has so much emotion. He could lead an entire episode on his own. Like, you don't need the Doctor in Genesis of the Daleks is my argument.
Interesting. I haven't seen enough to know if I agree or disagree with that, needing the Doctor in the episode or not. It would be interesting to have a villain-centric episode with no sign of the Doctor anywhere. That would be an interesting take for Doctor Who to go down.
Yeah, that was the entire premise of Mission to the Unknown. It was the Daleks on their own, and there was also like a band of survivors trying to kind of overtake the Daleks' plan. Like, the Doctor wasn't in that episode, and it's got the Daleks in it, which is an interesting premise. I think it's also going to be the premise of a spin-off. They're trying to work on the villain spin-off.
Oh, we'll see. I do like the idea of seeing more things in the Doctor Who universe where the Doctor just isn't there to save the day.
Yeah.
You know, just flesh out that universe a bit more would be pretty cool.
So going back a little bit, Terry Nation actually pulled the Daleks from the BBC in 1965, so it was like a 5-year period where they just couldn't use the Daleks, so they instead relied on the Cybermen, which were basically in most Troughton episodes.
Yeah.
In the early 70s, Nation wrote a few feature films and a TV movie, as well as 7 episodes of Persuaders and 4 episodes of Protectors. I don't know these shows, I can't speak on their quality. So Terry wound up actually back at the show in 1973 and wrote 3 Dalek stories in 3 years. He basically only came back because he was so unhappy with the decision that basically the BBC wrote a story in 1972 where they wrote a Dalek story without the permission of Terry Nation, so he was just so upset with them.
Understandably, I guess.
So Terry Nation wrote Planet of the Daleks, Death to the Daleks, and then Genesis of the Daleks in 1975, which is obviously one we're covering today. So after this, Nation also wrote The Android Invasion in 1975, the same year as Genesis. He would then return to the show 4 years later to write Destiny of the Daleks, which would become his last story because he was incredibly angry with Douglas Adams for rewriting most of his script. So Douglas Adams basically claims that Terry Nation didn't even deliver a script. It was just several pages of story notes and rehashed previous Dalek stories. The director of Destiny of the Daleks says that Adams had to write 98% of his script. So basically, Terry Nation didn't do his job and got angry when Douglas Adams had to do his job for him.
I love what's definitely a large part ego that seems to be fueling Terry Nation at this moment. You know?
God, yeah.
Yeah,
ego fuels most of his career, I would say, because him wanting the Daleks for his own is basically saying, I can do the Daleks better than anyone else, let me have it.
Yeah, the Daleks are mine and mine alone. I'm the one that is the best at writing them.
So the same year as Genesis came out, he created a TV show called Survivors, which lasted 3 seasons. He wrote 7 episodes of it. When Survivors ended, he immediately created Blake 7, which lasted 5 seasons, and he wrote 19 episodes. which Blake 7 keeps coming up, and it'll come up more in the future.
It keeps coming up. It's a show that I know nothing about, and one that we're probably going to cover at some point in this podcast's future. It's inevitable.
I'd love to find a way to fit it in. Nation moved to America in 1980, and his career slowed down quite a bit. He kept on developing program ideas and worked for a lot of production studios, but nothing really came from this fruition. In 1985, he wrote a few episodes of MacGyver, which I only know as a joke in The Simpsons, basically.
Yeah, that's basically how I know it as well.
In 1986, he wrote a TV movie, and in 1989, he wrote an episode of a short-lived show, A Fine Romance, which never actually got aired because the network cancelled the show, and that's his last credit, a TV show episode that never came out. Terry Nation died in 1997 at the age of 66.
Oh, well, that's pretty young. That's still pretty young.
Yeah, and the last almost 20 years of his career is basically trying to develop shows that never got made. Nightmare.
Yeah. Though, to be fair, that's like my entire career so far, so.
So just quickly about Genesis of the Daleks. Barry Letts and Terrence Dix were still responsible for developing the scripts for his season. They were obviously attached to the Pertwee years, and this was kind of like a limbo between the two eras. And they basically developed the scripts because the new production team was just still finding their feet at this time. I think the producer was actually 29 years old, so it was his first ever production job. So I bet you it was really great for him to come in and basically not have to do as much work as he could have.
Yeah.
So Terry Nation's first draft for Genesis of the Daleks was considered too similar to other Dalek stories. So Barry Letts sat back and said, how about exploring the genesis of the Daleks instead? And he used those exact words exactly, coming up with like one of the best Doctor Who titles of all time, the genesis of the Daleks.
So, sometimes your best work is just off the cuff, Sometimes you do the best stuff when you're not thinking that hard about it and you're just spitballing.
Yeah. So Robert Holmes, who was the script editor of his time and also wrote the story we covered last month, he hated the Daleks. Apparently, Robert Holmes met Terry Nation at the party and Terry said, I think the Daleks should be in every season. And Bob said, oh, do you really? And Robert wanted nothing to do with that idea and decided the Daleks would never appear in another story while he was script editor. So
Christ.
I understand the hatred of the Daleks, especially for appearing every year, which I think kind of carried on to the modern era when Russell T Davies tried to get the rights for a Dalek in Dalek. We've seen the Daleks every season since, so I think
we have, but it's kind of like tradition, I think I've seen the Daleks. I kind of like it. It's like a Christmas special. I like it then when they happen. The issue I always have whenever the Daleks show up is everybody forgets what a Dalek is. And they they always progressively built on top of it. So like the first time when the Daleks show up in Modern Who, it's Dalek, and it's just one Dalek. It's super fucking atmospheric and cool. And then by the time they're like the third or the fourth time, it's an entire army of Daleks, and they're taking over everything, and there's millions of them, and they're just not as scary anymore.
Yeah. That's my problem with Daleks. They're just overused, and every time we get defeated, and it's like, well, they're obviously not a threat. They shot a prime minister live on television, and they just also get forgotten about. Okay. So Barry Letts persuaded Robert Holmes in the end, and he basically said, this new script is really good. It's really exciting for me to explore the origins of the Daleks. So Robert Holmes and Philip Hinchcliffe, who was the producer, really got on board of the idea. Holmes wound up loving the plot strands dealing with the genetics and the morals of scientific development. And the original story was to be called Daleks, Genesis of Terror. It was very similar to the original story, but with a handful of key differences, which we'll get to when we get to those episodes specifically. And that's the making of Genesis of the Daleks. Do you want to dive in?
Yeah, why don't we? Let's dive in to Genesis of the Daleks, Episode 1.
My friend and I are not from your planet.
Aliens? Human.
Well, I am, anyway.
I've heard Davros say there is no intelligent life on other planets. So either he is wrong or you are lying.
We are not lying.
And Davros is never wrong about anything.
Really must be exceptional. Even I am occasionally wrong about some things. Who is this Davros?
Our greatest scientist. He's in charge of all research at the bunker.
There could be mutos, Nida. Intelligent mutos who've developed a technology.
Tell me, what exactly are mutos?
Mutos are the scarred relics of ourselves. Monsters created by the chemical weapons used in the first century of this war. They were banished into the wastelands, where they live and scavenge like animals.
In other words, genetically wounded.
We must keep the Khaled race pure. Imperfects are rejected. Some of them survive out there.
That's a very harsh policy.
It's horrible.
Your views are not important.
The episode begins, as all episodes of Doctor Who in this era begin, with the theme song. This theme song is very similar to other Doctor Who theme songs we've heard. The intro, however, is, I think, quite different to other Doctor Who intros we've seen. This one feels very much more like the inspiration to the modern Doctor Who intros we get. You know, you see the vortex, you see the TARDIS, you see the Doctor Who logo through it. It feels much more like the modern ones took inspiration from this than, say, the John Pertwee ones, where it's just kind of psychedelic-y and you see his big scary face.
I mean, this intro did start off with John Pertwee's final season, so...
Well, you know, it's weird,
yeah,
it's weird that they were using Tom Baker in John Pertwee's final season.
Oh, we were speaking off camera because obviously this is the new Doctor Who logo, but it's in this theme song as well. And wouldn't it be great if one of the 60th anniversary specials just opens up with the same theme song we've seen before in the Tom Baker era, and then David Tennant's face appears? That'd be so much fun. I'd love it.
It would be. That would be a lot of fun for sure. I think that would be pretty great.
I would love for all three of the anniversary specials to open up on an old intro, like a different intro each week. That'd be so fun.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've not even thought about, I've been so focused on what's the story going to be and stuff like that. I've not even considered other factors, like what's the intro going to look like for these next set of specials. It's just something else to get me more excited about it, I guess. But the episode opens properly on a bunch of gas-masked people shooting each other with blanks and pretending to die in a quarry. It's a pretty dark way to open an episode.
Oh god, yeah. Yeah, it's so dark, in fact. Lots of people complained about it right from the bat, basically.
Yeah.
They basically die in slow motion because obviously it makes the atmosphere more chilling, really. That's the only reason why it opens with slow motion. And also, Terry Nation hated this intro because he claimed it made the show unsuitable for his children, but he still loved the overall episode.
Interesting. But yeah, it's a pretty violent way to open the episode. There's some very cool atmospheric mist everywhere, which leads to a very nice transition where we see a bunch of soldiers in the mist fade away and the Doctor come out through the mist. It's in obviously a different location. It's very nice little transition as he's seeming very confused as to where he is until, of course, a Time Lord boops in front of him. This is not the first time we've seen this happen. This happened most recently with what was the title of the goddamn Pertwee episode we covered?
I'll let you remember it.
Terror of the Autons? Terror of the Autons? Yes, like in Terror of the Autons. However, this one's got much less blue screen and is therefore much less funny. But it's a very well written conversation, I think, between the Doctor and this Time Lord, where the Time Lords are like, we kind of want you to go and exterminate the Daleks before the Daleks are a thing, because we're worried that they're going to wipe out everyone in the universe. So we want you to kill them before they get the chance. To which the Doctor agrees pretty quickly. He's like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Whatever, I don't care about the Daleks. It does.
This conversation was supposed to be inside a garden, just like a perfumed garden, and instead of a wasteland. And basically, David Maloney thought it would be so much more appropriate if it's like on Scarrow in the middle of like a warfield that lasted a while ago. And it is so much atmospheric, it's so much better framed. And also the Time Lord is modelled after a figure of death from the Seventh Seal. You know, the classic black and white movie with the iconic chess scene on the hill between like a figure of death and the knight. Yes,
I'm super aware of that movie.
Are you shaking your head? No.
Yes.
if you just look up the Seventh Seal, one of the first images will be of a figure of death and the knight playing chess on a hill. And it's very gothic, and it's so appropriate for this era of the show.
It does. This conversation does lead to probably the biggest plot issue that this episode suffers from, which is time travel exists. And why wouldn't the Time Lords just time travel the Doctor back to a very early period on the planet, and he could just like go to the puddle that would eventually turn into Daleks and just take like a vacuum cleaner to it or something, you know, just suck up that puddle, and then the Daleks won't evolve on this planet anymore, and that would solve that problem immediately, rather than giving him this moral dilemma where he has to be like, oh god, do I let them live, do I not let them live, they're at war with these people for so long, you know. It's a much easier solution, albeit a much less interesting episode.
I think you have to, with a time travel show specifically, you have to ignore elements like that. You just have to be in the moment, I think.
It's one of the reasons why writing time travel is so difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the Time Lord informs the Doctor that he's already on Scarrow, and he just needs to kind of get this done now. And the Doctor's like, hey, but what about my companions, Sarah, Jane, and the other dude, Harry?
Yeah, Harry Sullivan.
Yeah. And either they were already on Scarrow with the Doctor, or the Time Lord teleported them to Scarrow as well, and they appear from behind some rocks. And from there, we are thrust immediately into even more action as missiles start raining down on top of them, and they quickly run for cover before stumbling.
Also, importantly, the Time Lord did give the Doctor like a little time wrist thing so that he could easily get back to the TARDIS, which is floating around in space, by the way, so because that coordinates aren't there.
Yeah. What's interesting as well is the second he went, you must not lose this, I went, oh, he's losing that immediately.
It's a good way of writing it out, so, you know, like most episodes you're thinking, why doesn't the Doctor just go back to the TARDIS? But in this episode he can't, because it's floating in space somewhere. Yeah,
which is pretty great. They stumble across the corpse of one of the soldiers that's been fighting and are very confused by it because it's got like an old-timey gas mask on but has like a modern or futuristic like jacket with a Geiger counter on it, as well as like a musket and a laser. And it's like, why is this hodgepodge of equipment that they've got? This is so strange. We later, in a few scenes down the line, briefly find out that the reason this is happening is because, you know, the Khaleds and the other ones, I don't remember the name of the other species on Scarrow. Yes, the Thals. They've been at war for so long, they're basically running out of technology. They're using old technology now to fight alongside, because they're just like not developing new weapons fast enough, which I think is brutal. Like, that's such a great idea.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating plot point. It's from the H.G. Wells 1933 novel The Shape of Things to Come, which followed the concept of a future war where technological resources ran dry, and so the population had to go back to basics eventually. And also the rulers were planning their hopes on building a huge spaceship or rocket ship to colonize the stars. And this was also Terry Nation was just fascinated about the idea of survival after a major disaster around this time, and he also developed Survivors, which was his next TV show, and he basically built the concept around that as well.
That's interesting. They continue through the quarry, and the Doctor spots that they are in a landmine, and so they have to be extremely careful walking through it. Then, almost immediately, the Doctor himself steps on a landmine. But it does lead to a very, very good scene of tension where Harry is trying to, you know, level out the landmine so it doesn't go off when the Doctor releases the pressure on top of it, and it's a great bit of tension building that I think really sucks you in. As much as it is like just padding for the episode to continue, it does a good stuff in, you know, showing Skaro as a dangerous place, showing that even the Doctor is in danger here, you know, like he's not infallible to the dangers of Skaro. He can himself find himself in life-threatening situations almost immediately, other than that, it's just a really good bit of tension.
Yeah, and it also shows a good relationship between Harry and the Doctor, because, you know, Harry helped save the Doctor's life, and the Doctor's so thankful of it at the end. Where it's just a lovely little moment where the Doctor's like, "Thank you so much, Harry." It's really lovely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They also get the feeling that they're being watched as this happens, and we see as they walk away somebody in like a giant ghillie suit or something. Don't worry too much about them; they'll come back later.
Speaking of Harry Sullivan, you know nothing about Harry Sullivan. This is the first time we've met Harry Sullivan on the show, isn't it? So he was basically created by Robert Holmes because he heard the Fourth Doctor might be an older actor, so a younger, more athletic man was needed for the action, and they decided we basically didn't need Ian Marter past the season because Tom Baker could handle the action himself, so it was written rather unceremoniously off of a show, which is quite sad because I really like Harry.
Yeah. The interest, I always find it interesting just how many companions were in classic Who. You know, because in modern Who, we've not really had that many companions. We've had quite a lot, but most of them have been pretty long-term 1-2 season companions. Not looking at you, David Tennant. And, you know, when you look back at classic Who, I feel like there's a new companion that I've never heard of every time we watch an episode. Like, just so many of them. But they eventually find their way to a dome, where they see a giant domed city, and they make their way through some trenches, and they're like, oh god, there's like dead people all over here. They try to get inside one of the doors that leads to like a bunker. They're like, we can't get in here, let's try going on further down through the trenches, when suddenly gunfire and smoke bombs and stuff all start coming out around them. They drop down for safety, or they pretend to be dead or something, and a bunch of people come running out the bunker and grab the Doctor and Harry, leaving poor Sarah Jane alone in the trench because they just don't check where she's standing. They check the Doctor and Harry. They're like, these guys are alive, let's go back inside. They don't turn the corner and be like, oh, there's another person alive right here.
Maybe they couldn't see her in her bright yellow trench coat. She just blends in.
This is now the Doctor and Harry separated from Sarah Jane as the episode continues. The episode continues as the Doctor and Harry are sent away on a transporter to go and see the commander dude, to be like, oh, look at these people we've captured. We don't know who they are. We suspect that they're bad dudes, mutos, they keep saying, which feels like a horrible slur every time they say it.
Which is I think the entire point. It's perfect. Yeah. It's a perfect name for the mutants in this episode, mutos. I love it.
Yeah. They get brought to this commander dude whose name I don't remember, but I think is he's very fun in this role. And this is where, like, you know, the metaphor starts becoming very obvious as to exactly who the Daleks are supposed to be, or the Khalids in this episode. You know, just in case you weren't really getting it. But they get the Doctor to turn out his pockets, which leads to a nice bit of levity, I think, when he just keeps pulling junk out of his pockets. Like, you see the sonic screwdriver, a magnifying glass, the jelly babies. Like, he's like, this might go on for a while. As he's just constantly unloading crap from his pockets, which I think is great.
Do you think his pockets are also bigger on the inside? They have to be, right?
They have to be. Yeah, they have to be. It's Time Lord fashion.
And also, one thing I like about all the Khalid soldiers they are so young, and it implies that all the older Khalids basically died out in this war. And also, it reminds me of they were, in the script, they're described as 15 or 16 years old, but I think they obviously cast people in their, like, mid-20s or early 30s or something, because they look much older than 15 or 16. They look like the cast of Class. Yeah,
they definitely don't look 15 or 16, but it does have a great line from Tom Baker. It's either in this episode or the next episode where he's like, kid soldiers and inexperienced generals. Yeah, you guys have got a great shot at winning this war. Which just made me think of a certain invasion that's been going on in Eastern Europe recently. I don't know. I don't know where that connection would kind of come from, but it's almost as if forcing people into endless war is never great.
But yeah, with the scene of the Doctor and Harry being questioned, it was originally done by two characters named Raven and Grainer. Grainer was supposed to be like an older general dude, but they decided it's best to just keep the younger man because the older dude was supposed to be like more questioning of like Davros's tactics and also the whole war. But to just focus on this dude who believes in Davros and just believes in the war I think it makes the scene much more bleaker, I would say.
Yeah, having, just a fanatic, a pure evil, or doesn't even consider himself evil, but a pure what we're doing is right. Like the Khaled race is the superior race. He's just 100% on board. Creates a much more disturbing character, for the Doctor to try and deal with, like just a pure on fascist character.
Especially when he's only supposed to be like 18.
Yeah, exactly. But he basically says that they're at war with the Thals and they plan on exterminating all of the Thals for the superiority of the Khaled race. The Doctor's like, Khaled? Huh, that's an anagram for Dalek. But then also he whips the guy's hand, making him drop his gun, and he then throws it to Harry. They take control of these guards, I think, very easily, very, very, very easily they take control, which I guess just plays into the inexperience of them and the youngness of them.
This whole escape sequence was obviously padding. You can tell it's padding. It was written at last moment because it wasn't in the script originally. I think it's a fun little sequence. It's fine.
Yeah, the escape sequence is fun, but it does make our characters run around the entire base, get outside just to get captured and brought back to the exact same room.
Yeah. But for some reason in this episode, I'm completely fine with it. If it was like any other episode, I'd have a big problem with it. I think it's because everything surrounding it is so good. I'm more forgiving of the filler.
Yeah. Sarah Jane, meanwhile, wakes up without Harry or the Doctor and goes for a wee wander through the wastelands as the Doctor and Harry try escorting this guy out of the base before coming across the General, who is fantastic in this episode. He is such a commanding yet kind of sniveling presence where he's all uppity for thinking he's superior than you, but he's got this annoying voice and he looks like an ass. Everything about his character is great.
Yeah, I think the whole cast in this episode is fucking fantastic. With Peter Miles as Nider and also the other dude we were just talking about called Ravon, and also the guy Michael Wisher as Davros. The whole cast is fantastic in this story. So obviously Peter Miles is playing Nider. He's got an Iron Cross on his chest, which I wonder what's that.
In case you were missing just were missing the metaphor.
It was removed after 2 episodes because the production team were like, I think this is too much. I think it's too on the nose.
It is, but sometimes on the nose is still not enough. If you've ever, I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Starship Troopers.
Yeah. I haven't, no.
Famous.
But...
Oh, it's an amazing movie. Absolutely amazing movie. Famous for a lot of people not getting the metaphor when it first came out, which is almost unbelievable because it so hits you in the face with the metaphor of these people being fascists and being Nazis. By the end of the film, they're just straight up in basically Nazi uniforms.
Bro. The same thing is happening with the TV show The Boys today. I just saw somebody on Twitter the other day basically saying, well, at least The Boys isn't woke, when the whole thing is a satire on fascism
God.
I think is Homelander a Nazi as well? I was like, there's Nazis in the show, literal Nazis, and people don't see the satire.
Yeah. God. Some people are so stupid. I think it's just media literacy, like not being able to like understand what a metaphor is or what storytelling is, and you're just taking things at a surface level. But
the thing with the boys is so on the nose. That's like my complaint about the boys. Sometimes it's a bit too much, but yet somehow people don't see it at the same time.
Yeah,
it's really strange.
Yeah, people are dumb. What are you gonna do? But the episode continues into, as we said, a very long chase sequence with the Doctor and Harry trying to escape this general and his men. They end up running through the whole base, getting out, running through, and there's some great shots here. There's some really nice ones in the quarry where it's like a really, really wide, like high up shot looking down on the Doctor and Harry running, which I think is very cool. But
you
of course, eventually...
You skipped over the best part of the base. I think there's a point where the Doctor tries to stop Harry from running forward, and he reaches out and touches Harry's crotch by mistake.
Yeah, I forgot he touches his dick. Yeah.
But yeah, there is some fantastic shots in the quarry, and also when Sarah Jane is running away from a couple of mutos, there's a great shot where a muto is like high up on a cliff, and you see Sarah Jane down on the ground like 10 feet below. And like Sarah Jane's like such a small image on the screen, and this Muto is like an imposing figure on the camera, and you just see his feet, and it's just so intimidating. And it's such they get some really good atmosphere out of these quarry shots, and also all the smoke going around. It looks great.
Yeah, they really use the smoke and the mist to their advantage in this episode for sure. But the Doctor and Harry get captured and taken back to the base, into the same room they were just in but now with the General talking to them instead, where the Doctor and Harry are like, "Oh, we're not from this planet, we're aliens." And the General's like, "That's impossible. I heard Davros say that there is no life outside of Scarrow." And what I really like, it's a really subtle thing in his performance, is when he's saying this, he starts like blinking really fast at a certain point where he's like, "Davros said different," where it's like, this just isn't computing with him. He's like, "Oh, you're presenting me with information that goes against everything I believe in. I don't know how I'm supposed to process this." It's a very subtle little bit of acting.
Yeah, and it's also like it's being programmed into him that Davros is always right, and it's like he hears it every single day, and it's sort of like a mantra, and he just repeats it to the Doctor as if it's like completely memorized. Like he's just like completely brainwashed by Davros's tactics here. It's his performance is so fucking good.
Yeah, it is very, very good. Yeah, so the Doctor and that get basically told they're going to be tortured and interrogated and taken away because, there's some stuff they want to learn about them. If these few people claim to be aliens and don't claim to be mutos, as they so suspect, they're going to get to the bottom of this. Meanwhile, we cut to Sarah Jane running through the woods, hunted down.
Sorry to cut you off. There's a great bit at the end of a sequence where... sorry, I have the names right here in front of me. You keep having to scroll up. Nyder turns to Raven and is basically like, "Okay, I have this list of requirements. You have to send these equipment to my bunker." And Raven's like, but that's basically half my equipment. I can't fight this war with only half the equipment. And Nyder is like, "These requirements come from Davros exactly. You can't unfollow them. You have to follow them exactly." And it's such a great little bit of like, Raven is beginning to break away from his conditioning here. He's fighting the system basically. Yeah,
he's realizing that maybe this war is a bit unwinnable if they keep taking away his weapons,
Yeah.
But we cut to Sarah Jane running through the woods, getting chased by some mutos, and she stumbles across like old rubbled castle or something. Like it's an old torn down looking building, inside of which is Davros himself looking... I would not believe that there's an actor inside that costume.
Exactly. This scene is the first time Liz Sladen actually saw Davros, and her reaction to Davros is Liz's reaction. So some kids were visiting this set on this day because we had won a competition to have lunch with the cast. which sounds fucking amazing to have lunch with
great,
Tom
yeah.
Baker and all that. They saw Davros and basically presumed he was like a prop because he was sitting very still. Tom Baker told the kids to move closer, and Michael Wisher scared the shit out of them by moving.
That's fantastic. But yeah, the costume is just on the wrong side of plasticky looking, where I don't like, it doesn't look like there's actually a person in there until he starts moving his arm. His face is so fake looking. There's so much prosthetic on it that doesn't look super great, but still the Davros design is, you know, a extremely iconic one. So
I think they did
it.
the best they could with this budget. They couldn't do any better, I think. It looks a lot better than Davros looks like in this next appearance, that's for sure.
But he is running a test on a Dalek. God, what Daleks in this episode? I never saw it coming. Where he's using voice commands and gets them to exterminate some targets. And it's, you know, he's like, now we can finally begin properly. And it's such a cool way to end the episode, I think, with then introduction to this, you know, one of the big bads of Doctor Who history, alongside the Daleks, one of the other big bads in Doctor Who history, with Sarah Jane discovering them by herself while she's getting hunted. Like, she's in so much danger right now, and it's such a great way to end the episode where you're like, oh god, what's going to happen, you know?
And Michael Wisher's performance is immediately intimidating. You feel the presence of Michael Wisher in this costume. He's so good. However, after episode 1 aired, in the Radio Times, a woman wrote to the Radio Times saying the episode was brutal, violent, and revolting, and without point or plot. Which, a lot of complaints came out of this episode because it's too scary. What are your thoughts on it?
I couldn't watch this episode. I was too busy hiding underneath my blankets.
You're hiding behind a sofa.
Yeah, I was terrified by it. No, I really liked this episode. I thought it was a really great way of introducing this story, and it feels different than most other Doctor Who stories. It feels darker. It feels more like, oh god, this is a really mature story for Doctor Who to suddenly be tackling. You know, it doesn't feel... I can get the complaints because it doesn't quite feel like a kid's show right now, does it? It feels like a mature sci-fi spooky time for adults dealing with big moral implications.
Yeah, this is what Philip Hinchcliffe wanted his era of his show to be like. He wanted it to be more adult and scare kids, basically, so that older viewers would be more interested in watching the show, like older kids and adults, you know. And I think, this episode is fucking fantastic. And when people complained about the violence and all that, Philip Hinchcliffe basically replied by saying, most children know the difference between fact and fiction. It's up to a parent to decide what's suitable for their child. He also says the violence is never what a young child could copy, and that Genesis will be seen to adopt a clearly moral attitude towards senseless warfare. And of course, also Mary Whitehouse, the infamous Mary Whitehouse, who was on a big crusade against violence and sex in movies and television. Like, she's the whole reason...
Just a cool person.
Like, she's the whole reason the Evil Dead became banned in the UK for years, because she just led a crusade and it worked so much. Like, Doctor Who basically had to get tamer after these 3 years after Philip Hinchcliffe left the show. She basically called this story tea time brutality for tots.
That just makes me want to watch it. That just sounds awesome.
Exactly. Like... If I was 14-year-old and I heard people complaining about this being too violent, I would fucking watch the shit out of Doctor Who.
Yeah, God, I would not get along with this lady if I was to meet her in real life. I feel like I would have a staunch disagreement with her. Like,
do you want to jump into part 2 of Genesis of the Daleks?
Yes, let us conclude this episode by diving in to part 2 of Genesis of the Daleks.
Sorry if they hurt you. I lacked the courage to interfere. But you did save me from becoming the very first victim of a Dalek. Thank you. Yes, now you used that word earlier. It had never been heard before. And yet only an hour ago, Davros announced that henceforth his Mark III travel machine would be referred to as a Dalek. Now, how could you have known that? Well, I have an advantage in terms of time. You see, we've come here at this time because of future concern about the development of the Dalek. I think you're concerned too, aren't you?
Yes, I am concerned, and there are a few others who think the same as I, but we're powerless.
Then let us help you.
You see, we believe that Davros has changed the direction of our research into something which is immoral, evil. You see, the elite was formed to produce weapons that would end this war. We soon saw that this was futile and changed the direction of our research into the survival of our race. But our chemical weapons had already started to produce genetic mutations.
And the mutations were banished up into the wastelands.
Yes.
The mutos.
Now, Davros, he believed that there was no way to reverse this trend, and so he started experiments to establish our final mutational form. He took living cells, treated them with chemicals, and produced the ultimate creature. Come with me.
Episode 2 picks up right where Episode 1 ended, with Sarah Jane spying on Davros like the voyeur that she is. The scene doesn't continue for too much longer, with Sarah Jane hiding from the Daleks and eventually being captured by some mutos, which is pretty gross.
But we do see the mutos in full appearance, and they just look like normal dudes. Really.
Yes. Basically,
their
they're
skin.
just...
Yeah, their skin kind of looks reddish, like they're kind of like dry skin or whatever. They kind of like have boils, but it's basically the only difference to normal human.
But it's like their hands, like their heads or their faces are pretty normal, you know, and they're just wearing big, like they're wearing like fur coats, which is I feel like
so
they kind of cheaped out when it comes to the mutants.
Yeah, so Terry Nation wanted to make the mutos' true appearance hidden by wrappings, so we must never know what they look like. I feel like if they just kept that motif, just keeping them wrappings, you know, that's still cheap enough just to wrap up their faces. Because
I think
now we just look,
you know, it allows
humans.
It allows your imagination to do the work.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh god, I imagine how disfigured and horrible they must look underneath all that wrappings. Whereas when you just see them as like regular dudes, you're like, oh, okay, I don't understand why these people are discriminated against. Like, but the episode then continues with the Doctor and Harry being handed off to some new security people, these ones in charge of interrogation, and there's a bit of back and forth about having a cup of tea for a while, which is some comedy, but then leads to the Doctor and Harry getting scanned by a big machine, and for the Doctor to lose his time wrist thing, whatever that device was called, you know, the thing that's like, this will let you escape back to the TARDIS, don't lose it,
Doesn't Captain Jack wind up like a time wrist thing? Isn't that also Time Lord technology, or am I mistaken?
I think you're confusing it with the vortex manipulator.
Yeah, isn't it the same thing? What's the difference?
No. The vortex manipulator, I think, was developed by whatever agency Captain Jack works for to travel back in time as like whatever his job was.
Do we know much about the time agency?
No, we know almost nothing about the time agency. I presume that they worked with Flux in some way, you know, or wherever what was the agency that the Doctor worked with in Flux? What were they called? That the Doctor's mum is in charge of? The Division. I assume they're a division of the Division, or something. Christ. You could retcon it into that. So it could be Time Lord technology. I don't remember if they ever said it was. But it's slightly different because this is specifically just to teleport you into the TARDIS, whereas the vortex manipulator gets you anywhere, you know? But they then are said that they're going to be sent off to Senior Science Man, and that's where their interrogation is basically going to continue. We then cut to Sarah Jane with the mutos, where we see that they're just regular dudes. They start fighting over whether or not they should kill Sarah Jane. And there's a line where it's like, "Why must we always destroy beauty? Why kill another creature?" And I'm like, that dialogue's really on the nose. That doesn't sound natural at all. Like,
Yeah, there's one scene, or it's one part of a scene where Sarah Jane's unconscious, and we're just staring at her, basically saying,
rubbing her
"Oh,
chin,
she's so
like,
beautiful." And it's really creepy.
It is really creepy, but the Mutos are then interrupted as some Thal soldiers appear and chase them away, but they capture Sarah Jane and another Muto, and they've got a line where they're like, Sarah Jane, she almost looks like a Norm. I'm curious as to what part of her makes that dude think that she is a Muto, you know, like, why is he so rude?
What I do love about the introduction of the Files, it shows that they can be just as brutal as the Khalids, you know, by shooting basically innocent Mutos who are just have to live their life cursed in this wasteland. Like, the Files are also the bad people here. There's no black or white, which is really nice.
Yeah, just shades of grey. Shades of awful, horrible grey.
50 Shades of Grey, some might say.
Wow. Episode certainly does take a turn when the whips come out. We then cut back to the Doctor and Harry as they are with a science man that you said was once in a Superman.
Yes, he is in the very first Superman, basically the opening scene. He's one of the Kryptonian scientists.
Which is where he's a man with a face. He's got a face where casting agents went, "You're a scientist. You look like a scientist."
He does.
You know,
he does come across as a convincing scientist.
Yeah, I guess he's fine. He's like an old white dude, you know. Pretty easy to cast in any role, really, if you want to just put him into any job, because white guys kind of have the advantage in every industry they're in.
No, they don't.
You're
what
right.
Are you talking about?
You're right. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. But he starts going through the Doctor's things and is like, "Oh, but how can you be alien? Davros says this to us, etc., etc." And then he's about to start, like, the Doctor's like, you know, he's like, tell me the story, Doctor." And he's about to start writing down what the Doctor's saying to him when he gets so interrupted by a alarm being like, "All the scientists, Davros is coming, look out, get in your positions, woohoo." And then we see, that's how it goes. That's a line by line recreation right there. Davros comes in to show off his fancy new Dalek, and this scene I think is pretty great. Where, you know, he's commanding the Dalek with his voice, and they equip it with a weapon, and the Dalek immediately goes to kill the Doctor and Harry, identifying them as, you know, non-Khalids. And, you know, it gets stopped by Superman scientist as he's like, "No, please don't kill them. We kind of want to run some more tests on them." And it's a bit of, I think, a way of showing that this scientist isn't as absorbed with Davros's mantra as the other people, and perhaps him meeting the Doctor is what's opened his eyes to that, where he's like, "Wait, hang on, Davros is wrong about there being aliens? How could Davros be wrong?" And then the second Davros is about to wipe out evidence of him being wrong, he's like, "Hang on, you know, let's not do that just yet," you know?
Like he feels like one of those scientists who just want to, like, explore the stars or whatever, but because of his conditioning, because he's brought up on Skaro in whatever year this is, he's kind of like oppressed. Like, basically, it reminds me of Donald Trump trying to get rid of the climate scientists. Like, they can't study the climate because Donald Trump removes all funding. Like, it reminds me of that, kind of.
If you just close your eyes and pretend it's not there, something doesn't exist. That is a law of science. So
but I'd love to talk a bit more about Davros. Of course, he is designed by John Friedlander, who also created the look for most major Doctor Who monsters between the late 60s and late 70s. He created the Zygons, Sea Devils, Davros, Oragons, and Sontarans. He also worked on Blake 7, surprisingly.
Oh.
So he didn't use foam latex for Davros. It just happened to fit almost perfectly to Michael Wisher's face. The foam latex would be too expensive for them to use. The mask, however, didn't fit David Goderson, who replaced him in the next story, Destiny of the Daleks. So the mask looks horrendous in the next episode. Here, it really looks nice. I think it looks great on his head.
Yeah, the mask I think looks really good. It's just, it looks fake. He looks like a doll. He looks like a toy man. He doesn't look like an actual man, which to me kind of takes me out of it a bit. But issues with the times, what you're going to do, this is the first real costume of Davros. There's not too much you can do about that. But what I really like is the way that when they brought back Davros in modern times, I feel like the costume and the outfit was very much inspired by this version of Davros, and it's a perfect update version into the modern look for what Davros should be. And as silly as every episode is when Davros comes back, I love him. I love him when he comes back. Specifically, I prefer the Capaldi episodes with Davros more than the David Tennant episodes with Davros, but still very fun.
Yeah. So a little bit more about Michael Wisher. He had several appearances as other characters in Classic Who. We just saw him last month in Terror of the Autons. After Terror of the Autons, he basically went on to do Dalek voices. He basically auditioned over the phone because Barry Letts was like, "Hey, can you do a good Dalek voice?" So he basically started yelling "exterminate" down the phone to him. On the set of Genesis of the Daleks, during the rehearsals, Michael Wisher used a plastic bag over his head with holes cut out for the eyes and mouth, obviously. To basically just get an idea of the claustrophobia of wearing Davros's mask in rehearsal, and also the fact that when you're Davros, you can't really communicate your acting by using facial expressions, so he had to figure out a way of doing it entirely by voice.
Was it the episode with Peter Davidson that we watched that had Davros in it, and he was absolutely incredible with just pure shouting energy?
Yeah, that was Terry Malloy. Sadly, Michael Wisher never returned as Davros on screen. Michael Wisher also wore a kilt underneath because it was more comfortable for him to basically wheel himself around, which is kind of funny. Davros is wearing a kilt the entire time. Do you think Davros is Scottish?
It must be. That must be why Capaldi could fit inside the Davros machine so easily.
One time during an interview, Michael Wisher said, "I was waiting for him to get to my scene, and people were so used to seeing me in a chair of sorts and being unable to see my face, but I'm sure they forgot there was an actor in there. Consequently, as time clicked away, that scene, we never got to my scene, and I sat lonely and forgotten. It wasn't until the studio lights went out completely that I suddenly realized they had forgotten me. So I wheeled myself about in the dark with my one arm, and I gave up and called for help. Somewhat sheepishly, I finally got rescued, and everyone was so terribly apologetic. I think that shows just how wrapped up in the show and people who worked on it got. They just accepted Davros rather than thinking there was a man in the mask and the costume."
Which sounds like a nightmare. That sounds terrifying. Because I imagine the visibility inside that costume is little to none.
Yeah.
Because your eyes are completely covered by latex. So, that sounds like it was terrifying.
Yeah. But also on the commentary, Tom Baker says it was a prank, so I'm not sure if it was done on purpose or what. But it's a funny story either way. So, as we said, he based his Davros performance on Bertrand Russell, the philosopher and mathematician who had advocated the use of the atom bomb to win World War II, and it's a perfect way to base your performance on Davros on. Just another maniacal evil genius.
Yeah. Christ. That just got me excited for watching Oppenheimer when it comes out.
Oh god, yeah, it's out in July, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the same day as Barbie.
Oh, nice.
Best double feature.
We might have to actually go in and see Barbie together, by the way.
I don't like seeing you in person.
Okay, mean. So Michael Wisher never made a return as Davros on the screen because he was busy in Australia when Destiny of the Daleks happened in 1979. And the production on Resurrection of the Daleks, which we've covered, it took ages to get started because of strikes, so he couldn't sit around for much longer and accepted other work instead. Terry Malloy became John Nathan Turner's Davros, so he was never asked back, really. He did, however, return as Davros in 1993 for the Trial of Davros, which was an amateur stage production for charity, which he also co-wrote. And yeah, it was really strange. A lot of stage productions of Doctor Who happened in the 20th century.
Yeah, but I mean, like, when the TV show goes off the air and people are just kind of like doing their own thing to try and keep Doctor Who alive, because they don't have access to that TV show anymore. So they're making these fan films, they're doing these stage plays, they're doing Dimensions in Time, all the classics.
So after Doctor Who, he acted in Terrence Dicks's Alice in Wonderland adaptation, and he also appeared in lots of real-time and BBV Doctor Who productions in movies like Wartime, and he was basically the ghost of Benton's father from the John Pertwee era. You remember Sergeant Benton we just saw last month?
Yes.
And he was also in Shakedown, Return of the Sontarans in 1994, which I feel like we should cover someday. These weird direct-to-video movies are so fucking strange.
We'll eventually run out of content where we have to start covering stuff like that.
He also continued to appear at Doctor Who conventions until his death in 1995 at the age of 60. He sadly died, I think it was lung cancer, because he was a smoker. And Tom Baker basically tells the tale of Michael Wisher on set of Genesis, basically smoking underneath the mask and just seeing the smoke. The smoke rise up from the paper bag he was wearing during rehearsals. God. The attitude to smoking back then was a different world, wasn't it? It definitely was. It's insane to think about.
Yeah. Oh, the episode continues as we cut to Sarah Jane with some of the Mutos with an extremely boring scene where they're like, we're with the Thals right now and they're going to basically make us work to death until we get killed by radiation by building this like big bomb or big rocket or whatever it is they want us to build for them because we're just expendable to them. And Sarah Jane's like, oh, that doesn't sound very good. And they get brought out to the big rocket where they slowly lift up some fuel cells and we watch a meter go from safe to toxic levels of radiation inside the room. It's taking me about 30 seconds to explain all that. It takes a show about 4 minutes.
What I said with Sarah Jane in episodes we've covered, where she has to be in some sort of like radiation zone.
Yeah, I know. It's a weird theme, and it's always like she's in a radiation zone, and it's the most boring part of the episode. It
is.
But we then cut to the Doctor getting thrown back into his cell with Harry, where Harry's like, oh, what happened out there, Doctor? Are you all right? And he's like, it's okay. I basically made up some science mumbo-jumbo for them for a few hours. That'll keep them scratching their heads for a while, but I learned a lot from them. Like, I learned that they're part of this huge like government bloc, this huge think tank deep underground that's got more political power than most people realize, and he's delivering a lot of exposition.
Yeah. What's important about what he says, I've learned a lot more from them than they have learned from me, which is a good line, but on ITVX, the subtitles are so simplified. That last part, which is kind of like crucial, has been kind of cut off. Like the whole subtitle system on BritBox, on ITVX, is just so simplified. It's so annoying.
Yeah, it's very the subtitles very much are the gist. They're not verbatim. They're very much like, this is basically what he's saying. So if there's like a sentence that runs on a bit long, or they just start skipping out words, or in some cases completely changing the sentence so that it's shorter. It's very annoying for sure. But then lead scientist Superman Man comes in, and they has a fairly interesting conversation with the Doctor where he's like, I don't believe in Davros. I think what he's doing is insane, and I'm trying to help you. I'm sorry I couldn't help you before, but I'm too much of a coward to like stand up properly by myself. And I think it's an interesting character to have this scientist that's like defecting against Davros in the center of it and trying to stage a coup basically against him because he's found out again about these mutants that Davros is going to turn all the Khalids into to fit them inside the Dalek tanks, and that's not something that he wants for his people to have. It's some nice fleshing out of the Khalids.
I wonder why he's so against it. It seems like a perfectly reasonable thing.
Yeah, I know. Like, it seems like it would be such a fun thing to do. But it's some nice 3-dimension. What I like about this story is the people involved are 3-dimensional. Like, not all the Khalids are Nazis that are like, oh, we love Daleks. Dalek is all we ever want to be. And not all the Thals are good people that are like, oh, we're just trying to fight against the evil Khalids. Like, as you said before, shades of grey. These are complicated people stuck in a war that most people don't want to be involved in, but it's been going on for over a century.
Yeah, there's like 4 different groups of people: the Thals, the Khalids, the Doctor and the companions, and also the Mutos. And the Mutos are supposed to look horribly disfigured, but some of them are secretly nice people or good dudes. The Khalids are all supposed to be like Nazis, but some Nazis are like, yeah, I don't agree with what's going on here. We need to stop it. The Thals are supposedly the good guys, and yet some of them just want to shoot Mutos.
Yeah, and use them to shove them into radiation rooms.
Yeah, and even the Doctor and the companions kind of like have a whole moral compass here, because it shows a lot more later on, but the idea of them willingly carrying weapons throughout the story is something that the Doctor and the companions don't often do, where it's like a moral compass here. Whereas it's not black and white, which I really appreciate about Classic Who does this occasionally.
Yeah, occasionally it'll do it. There's a really great scene where they're getting shown the mutants as well, where it's like just through the window into an observation room, and we don't see the mutant, we just hear snarling and like a monster growls as the entire room is like baked in green light, which again, kind of like what the idea they had with the mutants but didn't follow through with, lets your imagination do the work. So you can imagine, and you've already got an idea that the Daleks are like these weird squid people, because we've seen them. I don't know if we've seen them in other episodes as squid people yet, but we get the idea that they're this monster. Yeah, so you can infer in yourself with saving on a prop.
It's such a effective use of the budget, because it costs nothing to make a room with green light, and it's like more effective than showing an actual monster. It's really great use of the budget here.
We then cut to Sarah Jane and the mutants, where they're like, we should escape, and the other guys are like, yeah, you're right, let's escape up that scaffolding. That's the whole scene. Hang on. We get a nice little bit of symmetry as well, actually, as we then cut to the Doctor and Harry talking with the scientists, where they're like, can you help us escape? So we've got our 2 people in separate locations with separate problems, both doing the same thing, which is trying to escape, which is, a nice bit of writing. It's a shame that I don't care about the Muto story at all,
the Mutos are definitely the weakest set of characters in the story. I feel like even if they were covered in wrappings, I feel like it would be more interesting, but here they just look like random dudes, and they don't feel like their own separate entity in the story.
Yeah, and we then get an extremely long escape sequence with them, with Sarah Jane and the Mutos, where they like knock out a guard with a hilarious punch and then start climbing scaffolding until the episode ends. It's not an exciting way to end the episode. It kind of ends with Sarah Jane falling off and then freeze, and then it's like a freeze frame ending where it's like, oh my god, what's going to happen to her? A way weaker ending than episode 1's ending.
We also cut to before this, we cut to the Doctor and Harry kind of like climbing through a sewer system, and we're kind of like at the grating, and we see like a big dinosaur walk by or whatever. That's decent enough. The whole thing with the Sarah Jane thing is that Terry Walsh, the main stunt coordinator of the 70s Doctor Who, said that Sarah's stunt double was absolutely awful. It was a fall of about 8 feet. She just stepped nimbly off. I'd even got poor Liz Sladen to fall about 10 feet already onto some boxes before that. So basically, the stunt double was not doing her job very well.
That's a shame. That sucks.
And also, we're watching Liz Sladen actually climb the scaffolding of about 10 feet as well. And also the bars, she is a small person, and the bars are like too far apart for her to really climb onto. So she's doing such a great job in this sequence.
Yeah, it's a shame that the sequence kind of falls flat. You know, it doesn't quite have the impact I think that they were hoping for.
I think this is
that-
like one of the first freezes on the cliffhanger as well, which is really cheap. I think it doesn't work.
No, I think it's much more interesting where it's like dun dun dun, and then like a shock zoom in as the character's like, whereas the freeze frame just kind of feels like and the episode's over now. You know, it doesn't. It feels way more disjointed and less planned out. But that does take us to the end of this episode and to the end of this podcast, Scott. So, what are your opinions on episode 1 and 2 of Genesis of the Daleks?
Episode 1 is almost a perfect episode to me. Episode 2 is obviously weaker, you know, it's filler, basically. But yet, when you're watching the show on its own without having to analyze it for a podcast, I dug it, you know. I watched parts 1 and 2 together, and I didn't have a problem with episode 2. It's obviously just people sitting around in rooms having conversations, establishing basically what's going on. Yet I was still interested enough to say episode 2 is good. Episode 1 is a masterpiece almost, I would say. What about you? As a first time viewer as well.
Yeah, I think episode 1 was fantastic. Probably, you know, up there with some of the best Classic Who I've seen. You know, Classic Who's got these great bits where it can, out of nowhere, pull, like, some of the best acting and best writing you've ever seen in your life in between some of the cheesiest episodes you've ever seen. And I really, really, really dug episode 1. I was super engrossed to the story. It flew by for me. I thought the pacing was amazing. And then episode 2 came, and I went, oh, boy. Oh, this is slowing down. I'm getting less interested. Because I watched both episodes back to back as well. I watched them with my breakfast like a few days ago. And I remember digging episode 1, and then episode 2, I was like, oh god, this is not getting there for me. This is not reaching the same level. And you know, I don't think episode 2 is a bad episode. I've definitely seen much worse episodes of Classic Who.
You know,
but I don't think I wouldn't say it's.
Yeah, carry on. Sorry.
I wouldn't say it's spectacular. I wouldn't say it's a spectacular episode. You know, I think it's fine. I think it's a completely fine episode 2 that doesn't do much with the story, you know?
Yeah, we've just covered 3 stories this year, which has much worse filler than episode 2 of Genesis of the Daleks. You know, with the Time Meddler, the filler was Vikings raping a woman, which actually happened in Doctor Who. Wild.
Yeah.
Episode... Enemy of the World episode 3 was about basically a woman cooking
in the kitchen, yeah, and it was like a sitcom. Like,
yeah, I mean last month, I can't remember what the filler was exactly. It was just people standing around in rooms reiterating what happened last week.
Yeah, you know, sometimes Doctor Who filler can be real bad. This is far from the worst filler we've experienced, but you know, I still. It doesn't need it. You don't need to have it. You could skip episode 2. I think for the most part, you could maybe watch I think there's maybe 10 minutes of neat must watch stuff in episode 2, and then 10 minutes of actual filler. You know, if I was to cut all these episodes together, so far episode 2 is getting really chopped up.
Yeah. On the Series 12 Blu-ray, I think Genesis of the Daleks is like condensed into like a 90-minute movie. So I think that's a much better way of actually watching the story rather than the 6 parts together.
Yeah, probably. But that does take us to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for listening. We will be back next week with Genesis of the Dalek Part 3 and 4. We'll be covering them through all of April. Basically, it's going to take us to get through this story because it's just so big. In the meantime, why not leave a review for our show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Podcast Addict or whatever apps you use to listen to podcasts? It really helps the show get promoted to other people and to help other people find our show if you think other people deserve to be listening instead of just you. You can also find this podcast. You can find this podcast in video form if you prefer it as videos on YouTube at youtube.com/whowatcheswho, where you can see me waving to the camera right now. Wow, isn't that spectacular? You can find it on audio form wherever you listen to podcasts. There's a lot of links in the description. You can find us on Facebook at Who Watches Who, on Twitter at Watches Doctor. You can find me on Twitter at Cloth223. I think we're a pretty good follow on Twitter. We've been tweeting quite a lot recently. Twitter is a hellscape, but like Doctor Who Twitter can be pretty funny at times, and it's fun to hang out in. It can also be
Doctor
horrible.
Who
It can also
Twitter
be
is
horrible.
a bit hit and miss, yes.
Yeah. But I mean, Twitter in general is just a bit hit and miss. But you can find us on those platforms there. I think that's everything. You can send us an email at whowatcheswhopod@gmail.com, or you can just leave a comment on our YouTube channel. What else do I need to plug? I think that's all the back end plugging things that need to happen. Thank you very much for listening. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.